Members of council, you should have received that this meeting is being live streamed. You just click got it. Give me one more moment. I can confirm when we are streaming.
Bill? And perhaps, Madam Clerk, we can go ahead with the preliminaries, and then hopefully Councilor Olson will join us by the time we get to the meat of the issue.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. I do see that Councilor Olson has joined us, and I see that it is now 5:32 p.m. and you are welcome to begin your meeting. Okay,
thank you, Madam Clerk. Good evening, Council, SLT members, and the viewing public. I see that we do indeed have quorum this afternoon for this Committee of the Whole meeting on Tuesday, January 10th, 2023. And as we always do at this time, we will have the land recognition statement read, and tonight will be Councilor Wink reading the statement.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We begin this meeting by acknowledging the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and acknowledging reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous people.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Councilor Wink. Now turn to the clerk for the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I do have a motion put forth by Councilor Kerr that the agenda for January 17th, 2023 special meeting of committee be adopted as circulated. To you, Mr. Mayor, for any discussion.
Okay, thank you. After viewing the agenda, is there a councilor that has any comments, questions? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The vote begins with Councilor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councilor Kerr.
Yes.
Councilor Niznik.
Yes.
Councilor Olson.
Yes.
Councilor Wink.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. That brings you to the disclosure of pecuniary interest and general nature thereof.
Thank you. After viewing the agenda, does any council member have a pecuniary interest in general nature thereof to disclose? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've so noted. That does bring us to our first item on the agenda. That's item 4, and it's department reports. And we do have a presentation from corporate services from the treasurer and the deputy treasurer regarding the operating budget. To you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much. Madam Treasurer, you and your cohort have got the floor.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. I am pleased tonight to present the 2023 operating budget for the town of Pelham. I'm going to share my screen. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, just a minute. There we are. Okay, the agenda for the operating budget is we're going to review the operating revenues, expenditures, the Meridian Community Center, transit, the library, and the tax levy proposed increase. Before I start, I just want to mention that a lot of time and effort was done by the senior team and staff on bringing forward a budget to council that is bare bones. We recognize that these are very difficult times as far as the inflation, what's happening with the cost of living, and we tried very hard to keep the expenses as low as possible. So the first section is the operating revenues. This graph depicts where the revenues are coming from. I always think it's a very nice visual. As you can see, almost 83% of the town's operating revenues comes from taxation revenue. And in the other sections, the next big section that it comes from is the recreation and cultural services. And then corporate services also has operating revenues, which part of it is supplemental revenues. So this is just a visual of, how, where the revenue is coming from. So I'll go through some of the highlights of the operating budget. As all council you have the detailed operating binder that has all the different departments. We're going to go at a little bit of a higher level here. So the first one, the revenue, is the increase in the tax revenue of 7.92%. And this is the gross increase before the growth number. And we'll break that down, later on. The next item under corporate services department, we have a decrease in the transfer from reserves. In 2022, we had $227,000 of a transfer from reserves. This was from the operating budget. We had money from the Safe Restart COVID. It was from a grant that we had, and that's what we had for 2022. In 2023, we don't have any of that left. And what we do have is a transfer from reserve from the Human Resources Capacity Reserve. The next item, fees and revenues of an increase here. Last year, we introduced 2 new fees in the property taxes, one for ownership changes and one for mortgage fees. And what the budget is doing in 2023 is actually reflecting the actuals of what we're receiving as revenue. So that's that increase. The clerk's department, minimal changes in revenue. The fire and bylaw department, you'll see a decrease in bylaw revenue, and that pertains to a decrease in the Provincial Offense Act revenue, the court services revenue, because this money is being used for the Vision Zero program by the Niagara region. And with regards to public works, slight increase in revenue in cemeteries, and this is just reflecting the actual revenues that we've been seeing in the last few years. So are there any questions on this slide? Maybe I'll just do this section first and then ask questions. The next one is recreation, cultural, and wellness. And the total for this department is 1.5 million, an increase of 202,000. As you can see, the biggest increase is from the Meridian Community Center of 151,000. And also in some of the other recreation programs, such as youth and the swim programs, have gone up. The revenues have gone up, but also you'll see on the other side that the expenses have gone up as well. And under the Community Planning and Development Department, the biggest increase here of almost $100,000 is in the building department, and that pertains to anticipated increases in the building permits. So I don't know, Mr. Mayor, do you want me to stop after each section, or do you want me just to continue on and save all the questions until the end?
Let's save the questions till the end, perhaps.
Okay. All right. Okay, the next one is the 2023 operating expenditures. And so from here, you'll see that this is done by department. So the first one is the CEO's office. There's an increase there that pertains to the town solicitor position going from 2 days to 4 days, and the executive admin position going from part-time to full-time. That position has been at full-time hours for the last 3 years. Now it is just being reflected in the budget. And also in all of these line items, there are the salary grid, COLA, and benefit increases, With regards to the CAO's office, even though you see an increase here, you'll see later on a decrease in the legal expense to offset the town solicitor increase. That impact has a zero impact to the budget. Human resources, the increase here pertains to the new software that we have this year, the HRIS software of about 17,000, and the other difference pertains to the part-time clerk now having a full year in the budget, whereas in 2022 it was a partial year that the person started mid-year. The clerk's department. So the increase in the clerk's department is mostly salary increases in there. With regards to corporate services, the increase, you'll see the increase pertains to salary and grid movements. And then under the share admin, this is where we have an 11% increase in insurance, but we also have $100,000 of savings in the legal account because of the town solicitor now going to 4 days. And with regards to shared information systems, that's the IT department. The increase there mostly pertains to some new softwares that we have. For example, the asset management system and also the public service request system that we have. Under fire and bylaw, the increase there is there's some grid movements, but there's a $75,000 increase in the volunteer firefighter points, and this is due to mandated prevention training that that has to happen. And also there was an increase in the capital reserves as per the reserve policy. And slight increase in the crossing guards, and that's just an increase in additional hours for the crossing guards. The next section is the public works, our largest section that we have. The first one is the facilities increase. And the increase is the cost of utilities due to inflation. Also, there's $108,000 of an increased water for the 2 splash pads. In 2022, we only had 1 splash pad operating for about 4 weeks. In 2023, we're going to have 2 splash pads operating for at least 2 months to 2.5 months. And that's the cost of water. There's also been a transfer of some of the utility costs from the library and janitorial of about $56,000, but there was also a direct decrease in the library budget to offset that. The next item is beautification. So the increase in beautification, besides the grid movements, is also the increase in municipal grass cutting of about $100,000. And that's due to just the inflation. We went out for an RFP last year, and that's what the increase was for that. The next item is road maintenance, and that's an increase of $245,000. Increased street sweeping due to growth. So, you know, as we assume new subdivisions, that also increases the work for the public works department because they have to maintain those roads and sidewalks. Increased pavement markings, catch basin clearing, and a large increase in pothole repairs program due to underfunding in the capital budget for road transportation. So as you can see, if the money is not put into the capital side, then there's going to be more maintenance and repairs on the roads to make sure that that they are safe and without potholes. The winter control budget, an increase of $60,000, and that there was an increased cost for sand and salt as a result of growth, and an increased cost of contracted services due to a tender award. And also with the winter control budgets, part of the reserve policy, if the budget is short in year, depending on the weather, then the money is automatically transferred from the roads reserve to cover the shortfall. If there's a surplus in the winter control budget, then the surplus is automatically transferred into the road reserve. The next one is the fleet. The increase is fuel costs. We've seen a big increase in the fuel costs. Increase in repairs and maintenance due to the aging of the fleet. So as you know, as the fleet gets older and we're waiting for new vehicles with the long lag time of new vehicles being purchased, there's more repairs and maintenance that have to be done to maintain the vehicles on the road. And there was also an increase of almost $73,000 to the road, to their reserve as part of the capital policy. With regards to the airport, there right now, the increase to the budget from what we've heard is there won't be an increase in this budget for 2023. And that's it for the Public Works Department. So with regards to recreation, culture, and wellness, in the recreation and admin budget, the biggest increase of almost 87,000 pertains to reserve transfers as per the policy. The special events and festivals, the budget's almost the same as last year. The revenues and expenses almost offset each other. Recreation and wellness has a slight increase in expenditures. And that's the increase in the youth and swim programs, and that's also been offset by additional revenues. The next one is Meridian Community Center. We've seen an increase in revenue, and there's also been an increase in the expenses. Number 17 here really belongs down here, which is the public transit. As of January 1st, 2023, the transit has been taken over by the region. So the $178,000 of expenses that we used to pay the region to operate the services has been eliminated from our budget. The actual cost of the transit for the region will come from the region's portion of the taxes. So there'll be a tax increase on the region side, a special tax levy. And the library board, which we'll do it in more detail, has an increase of $28,000. And the last section is Community Planning and Development Department. And the biggest increase is the building department, which is the exact increase that we had for the revenue. The building department is self-sustaining. It doesn't impact the tax levy. If there's a surplus in the building department, the money is automatically transferred into the reserve. If there's a shortfall, then it comes out of that reserve as well. So in total, the total spend is almost $22 million for the 2023 budget, an increase of $1.6 million. And this is the operating expenses by department. As you can see here, the Public Works Department is 44% of the total budget. Next is the Recreation, Culture, and Wellness, and then Fire. Those are the three large budgets that we have. So some of this will sound a bit repetitive, but I always think we try to show it in multiple ways where the increases are coming from, so council and the public are aware of where the increases are coming from to be completely transparent. So this is by major expenditures to say, you know, what are the major expenses hit the budget from last year. So the salaries and wages, as we talked about that. So we have one new complement, and it's only a part-time grant writer, which as council is aware that the town has been very successful in writing grants. We do need someone that is dedicated to writing grants. We had outsourced before to get some of that help, but right now we need to have someone in-house and have that skill in-house. This also includes, as we mentioned, the town solicitor from 2 days to 4 days, and the admin for the CEO's office. The volunteer firefighter points are in there. And then there's an increase in grid movements, which was the grid was approved by council last year. And COLA increase for the unionized staff of 2% and non-unionized staff of 3.25%. And then there's an increase in part-time and seasonal staff as well. That's included in salaries and wages. Under benefits, that's a $260,000 increase. When the budget was originally done, we had the projection for the Green Shield was 21% based on experience. we got the final increase at the end of December after the budget was published, and it came in at about 11. It came in 11.7. So basically, we're going to have about a $42,000 savings from this number that was published here. Increase in other benefit rates includes OMERS, EHT, CPP, EI, WSIB of about 110,000, and then the other 60,000 pertains to benefit increases relating to COLA and the salaries. The next line item is transfer to reserves. This is 476,300, and this is what we talked about last week. It's the increase to reserves for the capital projects, capital expenditures. Material and supplies was minimal. We try to keep that at 4,000. Contracted services increase of 79,000. And this is the net amount between grass cutting, snow removal, and some other contracts. Those are the main ones. Debt servicing, a small decrease of almost 20,000. I think there's one debenture that finished in 2022, so we do have a slight decrease. As I mentioned last week, we're not issuing any debt this year, so that's why this number is not going up. Utilities, $110,000 increase. And this is where we're projecting a 3% increase in hydro, a 5% increase in natural gas, the $108,000 increase in water for the splash pads. And also this has been netted against the $52,000 in hydro savings due to the LED street light conversions. That part was positive. Insurance, there's almost 11% increase in insurance. Even though that number seems high, at one point we were looking at about 17%. So we were happy that that number actually came down the way it did. Software support and licenses, $48,000 increase. And as I mentioned, this is the HRIS system, asset management work order system, and procurement and public service requests. The next one, audit and legal, $100,000 decrease, and that's directly related to legal costs decreasing because the town solicitor is going from 2 days to 4 days. That's a direct savings. Fuel costs, that's an increase in the fuel costs. That's just the cost of fuel, and those are the summary of major expenditures. And this is just a pie chart just to show that, what does it look like? And the biggest one is salaries and wages, benefits, transfer to reserves, and contracted services. Those are the big items of the increases. And this is once again another summary of how the increases are, and this will bring us down to the tax levy. So as we mentioned, increase to reserves, 421. The net increase in salaries is the 540. The volunteer firefighter points, 75,000. Increase in benefits, 243. Increase operating reserve transfers from the human resource capacity, 133,000. This is a reserve that is there to offset. This is to offset some of the grid movements and salary increases. There was a reduction in the transfer from the working funds reserve, the 200,000 that we had last year from the Safe Restart grant. We don't have it this year. These are the 218,000 pertains to public works, and some of the increased costs in the contracted services for the grass cutting, as we mentioned, roads, winter control, fleet. This is due to growth, inflation, and increased service level requests, aging capital assets, net of savings and revenues and increases. Decrease in expenses of 66,000 from the LED conversion of the streetlights. This was the first phase one of this project. Phase two in 2023 will complete all of the town streetlights, and we'll see a larger decrease in expenses in the 2024 budget. Increase in utilities, hydro, gas, and water. That's the that's 53,700. We shouldn't have had the word water there. The water is down here, sorry. Increase in water for the 2 splash pads is 109,000. That's directly related to the splash pads. So this could be a little bit just regular water for the facilities. This is directly related to splash pads. Cost of insurance increase, as we mentioned, 46,000. Increased cost of fuel, 51,000. IT cost increases due to the internet bandwidth, software support, net of savings of repairs and maintenance and handheld devices. I just want to let council know that, the IT manager has done a really good job as far as bringing the costs of the cell phones and other and telephone costs down. We actually decreased across the town's budget $25,000 from the handheld devices because of the great rates that he has been able to negotiate with Bell. The next is decrease in transit delivery. This is the 178,000 now that the transit is being operated by the region. Decrease in the POA revenue. That's the court revenue of about 30,000 because of the Vision Zero project. Decrease in the debenture of almost 20,000 for interest and principal. Decrease in the legal costs, as we mentioned, 100,000. Transfer cost to the town budget from the library of 56,700, but we decreased the library board budget by the same amount, so there's no impact to the town. And library board increase of 28,000. Increase in recreation revenue of 194,000, and then other revenue increase of 23,000. So the total proposed increase is 1,337,198. Less the estimated increase in growth. It's a net increase of 1,075,572. So what does that mean on the tax levy? So the increase is 7.92 of the property tax levy. The assessment growth is 1.55. This is the actual number from Impact. So what this means is that new households will help to offset some of the tax burden. So the impact to the, I would say the existing residents is 6.37%. Okay, so the next section is the Meridian Community Center consolidated budget. So, as you can see here, with regards to the community center, I think in the last couple of years, we haven't had what we would say our normal years, like in 2019, because of COVID. So in 2020 and 2021, there were months in there that the community center was shut down because of COVID. We have increased the 2023 budget from the 2022, but we also have to keep in mind that we're still in a pandemic, so we can't go back to the 2019 levels just because we don't know if we're going to have a shutdown. So the number is a bit conservative, but it still is an increase of $182,000 from last year. And then on the expense side, the biggest increase we would have here are the salaries and benefits. And that pertains to staffing and wages. Because in the prior year, in 20 and 21, we had a decrease in staff because when the community center was shut down in those months that we had the part-time staff being laid off. So in total, actually the next slide here is better. This also includes the debt activity, but in total, the net surplus for the community center actually has an increase of about $48,000 in total of what the cost is to run the community center. Public transit. So this budget here, the biggest change obviously is the $178,000 decrease. This was contracted services that we had on the pilot project with the region. So this decreased the expenses by that amount. We still have revenue coming in from the community transportation grant. We were the only one in the Niagara region to receive that grant, and we have the $100,000 for at least, I think, another 2 more years, and the $30,000 is coming from carry forward gas tax. So we still have a bit of revenue to offset the transit. The 2023 library operating budget request. So as you could see here in detail, they've broken out the 2023 budget request compared to 2022. So some of the so the total net operating revenues decrease is 59,000. The increase to the town, let me just go back here, sorry. The increase to the town is municipal grant 20, it's 28,745 is the net increase to the town. They have other offsetting revenues as well. If there are any questions with the library, the main increases includes the COLA increases, salary grid movements, and job equity. The facility supplies costs were moved to the town, and they realigned the actual spending on utilities, and internet connection was renegotiated. So those were the library notes. And now I'm going to hand this over to Usama Siraj to talk about the economic factors and Pelham statistics.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Madam.
Teresa.
No, go ahead.
Thank you, Teresa. Good evening, members of council. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect. Through the mayor, so as Teresa mentioned, I will continue on the presentation, just looking at some economic factors and some external factors that impact how we budget in 2023. So year-over-year inflation in Ontario is about 6.7% as of October 2022, which is the highest that it has been since 1991 and significantly higher than the cost of living that we have budgeted for staff. Again, we've all heard of the challenges related to inflation, not just in our town, but across the world, really. So we want to keep in mind that the town is also not immune to that. A lot of the services and costs that we incur also are subject to those inflationary pressures. So we had to keep that in mind as we're building the 2023 budget. Looking at the minimum wage, it's increased about 3.3% in 2022, and it's expected to go up again in 2023. Teresa previously mentioned about the benefit costs, so those are higher than previous years. So all in all, the main challenge for 2023 budget has been inflation, as it's increased a lot of our costs. Over the next couple of slides, we will look at some of the charts and tables from the BMA Management Consulting Annual Municipal Study. For those who don't know, BMA Management Consulting obviously is a consulting firm. They do a great municipal study every year where it looks at more than 100 municipalities across Ontario, and they look at different metrics, different performance indicators. So it's a good document to look at when you're comparing yourself to neighboring municipalities or other municipalities of similar size. So what we have over here is the first thing we look at. I should mention at the time of the presentation, the 2021 study was the most up-to-date available because there's a bit of a time lag. I think the 2022 might not have been posted, but the numbers are very similar year to year. So just wanted to point that out, that it isn't a typo. It is the 2021 study that I was referencing. So the first indicator that we looked at is the average household income. So you can see the chart to my right. Looking at the town of Pelham, we're on the high category. So our household income is just under $137,000. That compares to the Niagara region average, which is just under 104. So again, we are the highest per capita income municipality within the region. And it's important to look at that per capita income because it goes into, your property taxes and the ability of, property owners to be able to pay. So that's why I think it's an important indicator to look at that. Next, we're looking at property taxes. So as per the study, in 2021, the Pelham's estimated average property tax was $5,025, which was ranked in the mid-range among the municipalities that they studied. Which was slightly below the Niagara region average, which was $5,067. And this was for a detached two-story home. When we looked at the detached bungalow or senior executive home, Again, Pelham was in the mid-range category for the property taxes that the average property owner paid, and it was still below the average for the Niagara region as a whole. So for 2021, the estimated property tax as a percentage of household income was 3.7%, which was in the mid-range of municipalities surveyed. So this goes back to my earlier point, looking at household income is an important indicator. So when we compare the property taxes paid by an average property owner and compare that to the average household income within our town, it was 3.7%, which again, out of the 110 or so municipalities that BMA studied, we rank in the mid-range. Looking closely to our neighbors, when adding together both the residential property taxes as well as the water wastewater cost burden, the total annual estimate was about $6,068 or 4.44% of household income. So looking at that comparison to Niagara Hamilton region, the average was $52.79 or 5.2% of the household income. So if you look at the dollar amount, we ranked high, but if you look at the percentage, we ranked low. I think the percentage is a better indicator because if you say, for example, have a $6,000 property tax water wastewater bill in a town where the average income is $200,000 versus in a town where the average income is $100,000, that will have an impact on the ability of your residents to be able to pay that same $6,000 bill. So looking closely at our property taxes, for the town of Pelham in 2022, average home with an average assessed value of $375,000 paid about $5,106 in property taxes. And the breakdown is in front of you. So it's important to note that out of the 5106, the town of Pelham only keeps about 41% of the taxes, or $2,080. And we only have control to set the rate for this portion of the taxes. The remaining 59% goes to the town of, the region of Niagara, as well as the province for the education levy. So both of these things, the town has no control over the rate setting and such. So looking at the factors that impact the amount of property taxes a property owner will may pay, we have three main factors that will impact how much property taxes somebody will pay. So we've got the assessment value, the tax rate, and property class. So we can take a little bit closer look at the three. So number one is assessment value, which is set by MPAC for all municipalities across Ontario. Now, MPAC will normally set its assessment value and update it every 4 years. However, due to the pandemic, they did not update the assessed values in 2020 and again in 2021, 2022. So as of right now, we are still working and calculating our taxes off of the 2016 assessed value. Again, this is something that we don't have any control over. MPAC will at some point update the assessed value, and then they will be phased in over the next 4 years, as is their standard practice. The next factor impacting taxes paid would be the tax rate. So the town of Pelham tax rate is set by the town based on property tax revenue required in the budget and the weighted assessments. Like I said, the region and the province have their own tax rate, which we don't have any control over. And last item that impacts your taxes will be the property class. Again, depending on the composition of where the properties fall, Pelham is primarily residential. Other classes such as commercial, industrial, and farmland pay a different tax rate than residential. So more of the burden of the taxes falls on the residential, therefore property taxes are calculated as such. I think the next slide will explain this a little bit better. So here we have the different municipalities within the Niagara region, and you've got the unweighted assessment and then the weighted assessment. So the top table is the unweighted assessment. So looking at Pelham, we've got, sorry, can you go back to the previous?
Sorry.
No problem. So looking at the town of Pelham, 89% of our assessed value, unweighted assessment, comes from the residential base. So what that means is majority of our tax burden is, taken on by the residential base. If you look at the commercial and industrial, we're only at about 3.7% for commercial and just almost negligible for industrial. And then we do have some farmlands. So the way this factors in is, like I said in the previous slide, there's one set of tax rate for residential. The commercial and industrial typically would pay a higher tax rate than the residential, and then farmlands would pay a lower tax rate. So depending on how your municipality's tax base is divided up, that can have a huge impact on how much property tax a resident will pay. So for example, if you just look at the last item on the first table, Niagara Falls, the city of Niagara Falls, out of the total assessment, only 71% falls on the residential side. That's because they have a lot of commercial and industrial. So that takes the pressure off of the residential base, and they almost have non-existent when it comes to farmland. So, in other words, a similar assessed value home will have much lower taxes in Niagara Falls than in Pelham, just because of how the breakdown of the assessment falls in the different categories. And then at the second table, we just have the weighted assessment. So again, when we take into account the weightings, Pelham is still very heavily relied on the residential tax base, and Niagara Falls, just as an example, goes even further, right? So now you're looking at only 59% of their assessment falls onto the residential, where commercial is about a third of their total tax base, which generally would pay a higher tax rate. So if we look at the next slide, I think it can explain things a little bit better. So this is just a screen cap from our tax rate schedule for 2022. So obviously on the first column, you've got the different property classes. The second column, you've got the property assessed value. So this would be your unweighted assessment from the previous slide, table 1. Then you've got the tax ratio, which is the next column. And then you've got the weighted assessment, which is the unweighted assessment times the tax ratio. So as you can see, the tax ratio, if you move along those tax ratio column, you can see the residential tax is applied at 1 times the tax rate. If you go down to commercial, you notice that commercial taxes are applied anywhere from 1.47 to 1.73% of what the residential tax rate is applied at. Similarly, industrial is anywhere from 2.2 to 2.63%. And then on the flip side, if you look at the farmland, it's actually applied at only a quarter of what the residential tax rate is applied. So these are all the different factors that will have an impact on how a property owner may pay, or what amount they may pay in annual property taxes. Looking at the next slide. So in 2022, a household with an average assessed value of $375,000 would pay about $2,080 in town portion of the property taxes, as I mentioned previously. So the proposed 2023 budget of 6.37% increase would amount to an additional $132 increase for the average property owner in 2023. And over the next slide, we just have a pie chart of breaking down how that $132 for the average homeowner is sliced. So you've got $39 of the $132 is attributed to new staff complements, pay increases for cost of living, merit and equity, and this is net of any other organizational changes. Moving along, the next one is increased cost of fuel, insurance, and utilities. So that accounts for about $15 out of the $132. Then the next one, looking up, is $19 is attributed to increased cost of materials, services for roads, park, winter control, insurance, software. Again, this is net of any other savings. The other biggest piece is the $38, which relates to increase in reserve transfers and capital expenditure funding. So what we talked about last week. $2 is attributed to the increase for library board, and about $19 is attributed to the increase for the cost of benefits. So with that, we have the recommendation that the committee receive the 2023 operating budget presentation by the treasurer and the deputy treasurer for information, and that committee recommend to council to approve the 2023 operating budget at their meeting scheduled for February 6, 2023. And that concludes the presentation, so we will open it up for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that revealing the numbers, Deputy Treasurer. Very informative at the end, exactly. Teresa, then, are we indeed ready for questions?
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you. To the committee then. If you have a lot of questions, let's try for two at a time from each individual committee member. And then once everyone has a shot at it, we will come back if you have more questions. Who would like to start us off? First of all, I guess if I may, just like to thank staff for putting together a bare bones budget. That's quite obvious. The no new debt involved in this in the budget this year, and yeah, it's a very very well done. Thank you to staff for doing that. Councilor Hildebrand, I believe I saw your hand first.
Through you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you. I'm only going to have one question. It has to do with revenues. And it has to do with the summary of major revenues. And it has to do with a number of 833,656 for the year projected for 2023. When I look back and come up with a projected for 22, the number is 887,000. So we're projecting less than $50,000 less for the coming year than we had in the past year. My projection is we should be far more than where we were in 22. So I don't understand why we're projecting that much less.
Okay, thank you.
Is basically over.
Okay, thank you for the question, Councilor Hildebrand. We'll turn to the treasurer, perhaps.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So you're referring to the summary of major revenues?
That's correct.
So under the rental, is that what you're looking at?
Correct.
Okay, so the 833. So this pertains to, so this is just the rental of like the ice rentals and the gym rentals. That's what that pertains to. But if you look at all of the RCW area, the increase is almost, it's about $190,000 with all of the various programs.
But what I'm saying is, when I added together the projected actuals for 22, it's at $887,000. And we're only projecting a budget in the revenue column of $833,656. So I'm projecting a revenue. You're projecting a revenue of $50,000 less than we're going to achieve in 22, if I add all the numbers together properly.
Okay, so are you looking at the, Councilor Hildebrand, at the Q3 report? Is that what you're looking at?
Basically, yes.
Okay, so the Q3 report for the Meridian Community Center is a consolidated report that has all the revenues pertaining to the Meridian Community Center. What's showing here under the major revenues, this is just the revenues for the rental of the ice and the gym. That's what that is. The other one has the programs that are being run at the MCC. So the better comparator would be the schedule that we have in here for the Meridian Community Center consolidated. That shows everything that is going on at that community center. So if you want to compare the Q3 report to the budget, it has to be the Meridian Community Center consolidated schedule. So if we look at that, and I'm just flipping to it now. As I'm flipping to it now, hold on. Let's see here. We do have an increase, as I mentioned earlier, of about almost 198,000. So that's page 50 of the budget. So let's go to page 50. All right, here we are. So if I turn to page 50, my revenue, that one's just the facilities. Okay, so consolidate one. Just kind of move parts here. We definitely are going up. We're not going down in the community center. Yeah, so if we look at the consolidated budget, so that's, I'm just going to shoot my screen again and turn to slide 16. So if you can share slide 16. Okay, just a second. That way we're all looking at the same thing. Okay, so can you see that, Mayor?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so if you look at, this is the consolidated budget for the community center, which is the budget that we bring to council on a quarterly basis. So the total here is the approved budget for 2022 was 929,492. And the proposed budget is 1.1 million with an increase of 182,000. So you'll see the arena revenues going up almost 74,000. The rental space is 27,000 for the gym. Other programming revenue, 25,000, and then other revenues as well. So it is going up almost 20%. And as I mentioned earlier, Councillor Hildebrand, the concern here is that, we are still in a pandemic and we just can't jump to the numbers we had in 2019, because if we have a shutdown, the first thing they shut down is the community center, which in 2020 and 2021, we had months that the community center was closed. So I don't know if the director of RCW would like to comment on that.
Well, first, I'll go ahead to the director then, Ms. Van Ravensway.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. This is true. We are increasing the revenues by approximately 181,000, but we always have to keep in mind, it's not only we're coming out of the pandemic. I mean, I would hate to see the doors close again. Who knows? Hopefully they'll never do that again. But we're also, we have residents and users of the facilities that have other pressures that are going on. Inflation is up. Recreation is a pleasure. It's not a necessity. And we always have to keep that in mind. We're seeing more and more, we had one of our annual Silver Sticks canceled. And the reason why it was canceled is because the families just cannot afford to go into so many tournaments. We are seeing that. So with the 181,000, we like to be, increase. That is a conservative amount of money that we're dealing with. We do have programs that are starting up that are extremely successful at the moment. But again, we are hearing from residences that they are pressured into other necessities other than recreation. So hopefully we will meet our goals as we have set for 2023.
And back to you, Councilor Hildebrand.
Thank you very much. I know it gets detailed and you got to surf through a lot of numbers to come up with it. But I know, for instance, I partake in a lot of your activities over there, and every activity I come into, the demand is higher than the supply. So, which is good news. I
Yep.
think generally people are going to spend money on recreation in some way or another. And I think the MCC is the greatest bargain in town. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Councilor Hildebrand. Councilor Olson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Looking at this budget, I've been through it line by line, and what our director and treasurer have said, I believe is true. We've erred on the side of conservatism as much as possible, but there's still some terrific unknowns ahead of us, and we should remember that this is a no debt budget, no incremental debt budget. And how it illustrates how leveraged debt is in this town and how wise we were to forego the debt on the new library, because I can't imagine the size of the increase if that happened. But over all of the numbers line up well for me, line by line, and we've always taken an approach to different things such as fairness for our employees, and I think there's room in the budget for a few smaller items. And what I was going to suggest was it's time for the town of Pelham to adopt the living wage policy, And I would like to request that we do a study of that, because we have employees who are earning the minimum wage, and we have several examples in our community, including Penn Financial, Meridian, Pelham Cares, Niagara Pallet, Enviro Niagara, a new business in town, and the corporation of the city of St. Catharines as examples of organizations that have adopted the living wage. And I believe there was a presentation made by the CAO at one time. And I'd like to suggest that if we could consider that as something to do, and perhaps it's not in this budget, but perhaps it's in a future meeting. And perhaps we take the money to cover this from the Human Resources Capacity Building Reserve. I know that the clerk and the staff wisely paid the living wage for the recent election there for the election workers. I think that was wise, but I would like to get a comment from the CAO about that and how we could pay for this and how that would look in total, because I don't think we should be passing anything tonight or suggesting anything tonight that adds to the budget that's already so well done and analyzed. But I would like to see that happen for the in fairness to all of our employees in the town. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Olson. To the CAO, Mr. Cribbs.
Well, thank you for the question. I do think that would be an appropriate report for sometime in the spring. We have a window of time in between passing the budget, getting our capital, our RFPs out the door, and then we have a few months before we actually start working on budget for 2024, which we normally start in July. When it gets the hot time of year, we start thinking about the winter. So, as is the municipal way. I think we need to do some analysis. I can tell you that a living wage would impact some people at the MCC and would also impact crossing guards as two populations that I think would be easily identifiable. And we'd be happy to conduct that analysis. It would have to be a joint report from Human Resources, my office, and Ms. Quinlan Murphy and or Mr. Siraj, because it requires some analysis and analytics within that. At any rate, that is a doable report and something we'd be happy to discuss. That said, and depending on the quantum of that might be something we could conceivably absorb into the operating in 2023, depending how much or how little it was. But that would be a sort of a discussion for like April or late March through to mid-May, somewhere in there. Those are my thoughts, such as they are. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. CA. Councilor Olson.
Yes, I think that would be a worthwhile discussion, and I certainly welcome a report, because I think this may have something to do with the retention of our staff and recruitment of staff, and this may be something that we'd like to see probably. I guess the spring would be fine, because we're going to be looking at say lifeguards and those types of things, I think. So thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Olson. Any other members of council with questions or comments? Councilor Nesnick.
Yes, so thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for making those beautiful charts and making it fairly simple for someone who's not very budget minded, to be honest with you. I just have a couple questions. If through you, Mr. Mayor, if someone could explain what the firefighter points is for me being a newbie. So I assume it's just experience and then they get points, but maybe someone could really tell me what that is. That's my first question.
Okay, to the treasurer, or should we go to the chief?
The chief.
Okay, we'll go to the fire chief, Chief Limburner.
Good evening, everybody. And through Mr. Mayor, to your question. So the way our firefighters, our suppression volunteers get paid is through a point system. And each point has a value to it, which is approved annually by council. And so when you attend a call, or a training session or something fire related, you get paid 2 points per hour, because there's sometimes you're working half an hour. So each point is worth a set amount. So at the end of the year, we tally up all the points and we award all those points based on that set amount. So there is a large increase in that point money this year, or a large ask, because in last year in 2021 and leading into 2022, the provincial government passed mandatory certification in the fire service. So things that we weren't doing, or things that we were doing not so wholeheartedly, is that now we're required to do it across the board. So the number of points that are required to cover this training, it really comes down to the amount of. So a training session, just kind of give you an idea, we have 100 firefighters. We just completed a pump ops course for 12 firefighters, and it was about $14,000 in points just to train a dozen guys, and we have 100 of them. So it's going to continue to increase over the next few years, but that's kind of our best estimate at why the increase.
Thank you.
Thank you. So is there a point where it becomes a dollar value that you need to reconsider how our volunteer firefighters are paid? That might not be for this year. I'm just saying, are there other creative ways that our volunteer firefighters are paid, or in other municipalities other than points? Or
through you, Mr. Mayor, no, the volunteer fire departments in the region, we all use a similar system where you're awarded points, and you really are getting paid by the hour. We just track it using a point system.
okay. Good, thank you so much. Then I have two more questions. What is the classification of greenhouses? So is that considered farmland or commercial, or where does that fall into the categories?
Who wants that one? Treasurer or the CAO?
Well, I think Ms. Weens and I will have similar answers. Hers will be more detailed than mine is, but understand that classification ultimately impacts critical to that conversation. So it's not something over which we have complete control. And complicated farming operations will have different parts of their premises classified differently. So, for instance, we run into that with the cannabis industry, where there's a component that's warehousing, and that's taxed differently and classified differently than a component of the property where you grow, than is, say, office space, for instance. So it's hard to give you a universal straight answer in that respect, because that changes property to property, and classification is a fight that is typically, believe it or not, held between the province and the property owner rather than the municipality per se. That being said, our tax system, everything is a multiple of how we tax residences, so homes, and either so commercial, for instance, pays more than a house, $100,000, a business worth $100,000 and a house worth $100,000, the house pays less. Conversely, in agriculture, they pay 0.25, I think, in Pelham, so about a quarter. And the numbers are different for industrial, commercial, residential, etc. So that's generally speaking how the system works. That's a conscious policy choice that the town makes as to what the ratios are. The classification is something done by legislation and the province / MPAC. Within that, though, I think Ms. Weens has more specific answers vis-a-vis hoop houses, greenhouses, etc.
Okay, thank you, Mr. CAO. And Ms. Weens, any further comments then?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Yeah, so it is MPAC that establishes the classification. It's not something that the town establishes. And as Mr. Cribbs indicated, with greenhouses, they tend to have multiple classifications, and that portion of the greenhouse that is devoted to growing only would be kind of the farm classification. But that portion of a greenhouse that might be using, might be involved in something else, whether it's packaging or processing or warehousing, gets a different classification. So MPAC will visit these sites and of course make those determinations. They also receive from the town, whenever there's a building permit, they receive the information. We report to them monthly building permit activities, and they will come and review building permit drawings to understand, you know, whether it's a greenhouse or a industrial building or a commercial building, kind of the breakout of space that's utilized in those facilities to determine the classifications. And then ultimately they will do visits to those sites and confirm that.
Okay, thank you so much. So that, yeah, because ideally, if, you know, we could get those cannabis places on the higher tax end of things, that would be monetarily advantageous to the town. So, but that's a good explanation. Thanks for clarifying that. That makes sense.
Yes, and certainly, you know, there was lots of conversations and discussions with MPAC regarding, you know, the cannabis greenhouse operations, but they have certainly taken the position that, you know, a farm is a farm is a farm. We don't really distinguish between what is growing on that farm, whether it's, you know, cannabis or flowers or cucumbers or, you know, an orchard. So that's their, you know, that is their guidelines and their requirements that they look at, but they do certainly make the distinction, and certainly high, you know, commodity products are not, you know, aggregated differently when it comes to those classifications.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. And then if we could just go back to the Meridian budget. So I just, if you can clarify through you, Mr. Mayor, maybe for Ms. Quinlan Murphy, is the Meridian making or breaking even at this point, or are we losing money every year on the operation? And it may be COVID related, and I see that, you know, the revenue is conservative, which is fine. So I just don't want to go year after year after year with the Meridian Center losing money.
So
But maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah. So through you, Mr. Mayor, what we have here, as I mentioned, this is the consolidated budget, which has, you know, it has everything in here. So for example, any IT, even though IT has the budget in corporate services, if it has anything related to the community center, this is where it captures the true cost of it. So if you look at the net surplus before debt and other items, the proposed budget is, the expenses are $1.5 million higher, like than the revenue. So it's not there to make money. It's there to provide a facility. So I think the intent was when they were, I think the intent was when they replaced the old arena and built a community center that also included, you know, 2 gyms and other facilities. It was to provide this facility to the town. So the answer is no, it does not make money. So I don't know if
is it close to breaking even, or is it losing?
No, well, the net
million?
deficit is 1.5 million. Is the net
And that's before debt.
That's before. So if you look at the debt and all that, the net debt and other items, so the net deficit is $1,053,000.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So part of this analysis, what you'll see this line here where it says pre-MCC RCW and facilities net cost. This was the cost to operate the old arena and facility. So we subtract that out of all the costs to show you what the net cost is for the MCC. So it's an additional $1 million a year to have that level of a facility versus just I don't know if it was there one arena or two, like one pad arena or two, I'm not sure what it was, but just to have that arena. So now you've got that facility that does all kinds of activities.
Okay. So just to clarify, the old arena also lost money every year? 760, okay, thank you very much. That
They're not.
So it's a service to the town.
Yes.
It's a facility used by the town residents who pay taxes, so that's why it offsets the loss. Okay, thank you.
It's not a moneymaker.
Okay, well, break even closer would be nice, but that's okay.
It's a wellness maker.
Yes.
Yes, that's right. Okay, forgot that.
It's an investment in the community.
Correct, yes. Thank you for your, that's all my questions.
Thank you, Councilor Nesnick. Any other committee member at this time? And I see Councilor Wink.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. Just like to thank staff for what they've gone through. If we're looking at 6.3% increase, I know the initial iteration of the budget was well over 10%. So staff worked extremely hard in paring this down. I'd like to commend staff for the report and the way they provide the report. So the general public is probably looking at this and saying, why aren't they asking all these questions? Well, the presentation that we get is far more detailed than what we've gone through today. And every time you see a bracket under notes, there's good detail there that as a result of the detail that's provided, we don't have to ask those questions. I'd like to, again, commend staff. They've done great work on this. It's not an enviable budget to have to say that there's a 6.3% increase. As a taxpayer, I don't like it, but there's we have to continue to make our town viable to be able to provide the services that we do provide, to fix roads and to fix sewers and whatever, and to provide parks and recreation and the like, and plow your streets and whatever. So it's a tough job to come up with, and staff has done an admirable job in doing this, and I thank you for that.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Wink. I have one question to the treasurer. Teresa, the 1.7 that we had, or that you staff came, I believe that was the 1.7 for growth. That was indeed confirmed. That has been confirmed by MPAC.
Through Mr. Mayor, it's 1.55. Yes.
Okay.
Confirmed. Yes. I just double checked it again this morning. That's the final number.
Okay, thank you very much for that. In recent history, we have been a little higher in that, so we are starting to feel the effects of the downturn. We probably haven't felt the full effect of it until next year, but even at 1.5, it's better than zero. So it's good to see that number. Excellent.
So through you, Mr. Mayor. It's difficult to know what the number is. It depends when the new properties get onto the impact listing. They have up to 2 years. So there are still quite a few properties in the town of Pelham that have not been assessed, and they have 2 years to do that. So, we definitely can see a higher number next year. We can see the same number or a little bit lower. We don't know. That's one number we don't know.
Right. Excellent. Thank you for that. Any other questions from any committee members? I see Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's more of a generalized question, and Ms. Quinlan Murphy sort of mentioned it. At the point at which impact assessment takes place, you talk about within 2 years. When does the clock start on that 2-year window? Is it from the beginning of construction? Is it from the point of gaining it physically, you can reside in it? And does a person request that? I guess my concern is that there's an awful lot of building that potentially may not be assessed and hitting our rolls that are well past the 2-year window in terms of things, especially watching an awful lot of renovations that have gone on. It's just a generalized question. I just wonder how fast and who initiates the impact assessment.
I see, Mr. CAO, you want to attempt that?
So there's well, in plain English, there's a trigger in the legal process. If you've ever bought a new house, so the day you take owner, whether you move in or not, if you buy a house from, in this case, a developer, that creates a paper trail, and that's what starts your 2 years. So, I did this many moons ago in a different municipality, and I was sort of, about 15 months before I ended up paying property taxes. But then, of course, I owed for 15 months backwards, right? So they have 2 years. They're fairly consistent in where I have yet to experience one of my employers getting the money more than 2 years later. Now, when you get a bill and when you choose to pay it, that's a separate question. But the actual work is done within the 2-year time frame. They're pretty good about that. And at the end of the day, we always are, we're the very first to get paid. So the town always gets its money for property taxes that you can't transfer ownership without satisfying that obligation. So that's the good news. We always get it. It could take 2 years, but it will come.
Councilor Kurt?
Yeah, I'm just following up. Having built my own home, it was up to me to get a hold of Impact to have them come in and do the assessment. I didn't purchase from another person, and there's an awful lot of people that go out and do independent contracting in the building of dwellings. That was my only reason for the question.
Okay, thank you, Councilor. So to the CAO, how would that work if someone does indeed build their own? When would we catch that?
Well, I'm sure Ms. Weens will give a good answer. The bottom line is we deliver the water, assuming you're not on a well. At most construction is on municipal services, right? The vast majority of it is urban. So we're always aware, right? People start flushing toilets, that involves us in a bill. People turn on the tap, for instance. So you can't really connect to us without us knowing. But with that, I'm just trying to satisfy you that there is not a massive problem with fraud and people paying taxes in the town of Pelham. We do get our money, even if it's 2 years delayed. Ms. Quinlan Murphy's basic point is entirely correct. There's a significant amount of construction that happened late last year that we did that we don't have revenue for yet. We expect sometime this year coming. That said, there's also been a slowdown. What the net result of that will be, none of us are comfortable guessing. And with that, I'll turn the baton over to Ms. Weens.
Okay, Ms. Weens, any comments?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. So every month we submit reports to MPAC on number of building permits, the addresses, the roll number that's assigned to them. And then we also provide them information on a monthly basis, not just the permits that are issued, but also when occupancy is granted to that building, so that they know that and they get that information. So it is something that's reported monthly to MPAC, and the time for them to catch up and do what they need to do is certainly something we don't have control of. But as Mr. Cribbs indicated, it is typically done within the 2-year time frame. And, for example, in this year, I don't believe, the growth for the new commercial plaza that opened this year is probably not included in that 1.55 growth. So we may see that next year. There was the new condo apartment building as well. Like that is only towards the end of this year started to get occupied. So we may start to see some of those come in next year, which will be kind of bigger numbers and bigger triggers. And then certainly the single residential unit construction has slowed down. So that might be somewhat less. But, a home takes anywhere between 8 months and a year to build. And then, you could have that 2-year lag before you start to get taxes in on it. So it is something though that we report regularly, and that's why it's critical for us to get building permits and for people not to be building without a permit. And so, because that's the way we notify MPAC.
Thank you, Ms. Weeds. Councillor Kerr?
No, thank you. If you live in the town and you require water and you require sewers, it's pretty easy to be tracked. But if you're a rural person to have your own drilled well and you're on a septic system, the town really doesn't track you quite as closely. It's just an observation, that's all.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Any other questions, comments on the 2023 budget? I see Councillor Hildebrand.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for this opportunity. This probably ends up going to the Public Works Director. There was a mention that there was $100,000 extra for Public Works subcontract costs. We heard from the soccer club that they wanted a lot of extra work. Does that impact this number, or is this strictly the subcontractor extra?
And we'll go to the Director of Public Works, Mr. Marr.
And thank you, through Mr. Mayor. The cost that we have in for contracted services did not include the weed treatment for the soccer fields that the soccer club requested. That's not included in the budget. So just expanding on that, we did look into that to do one field, one soccer field and one baseball diamond with weed control for the season was approximately $20,000 in operating costs.
So that increases specifically your contract increases.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. So there's a number of contracts that came due this year. Those were competitively put out for tender, and we received bids on all those. So the cost increases are a combination of a number of different contracts that have had seen increases over the past years.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hildebrand. Councillor Olson?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, and refresh my memory about if the treasurer could refresh my memory about our annual subscription to the Hospice Niagara, and how much that was, and perhaps how much our work with Pathstone is, and who's financing that this year. Is that in the budget?
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Mayor, the town has committed $85,000 to hospice, $17,500 per year. I think this is our third year, for a second or third year with that. So that is in the operating budget. And we also have municipal grants that we give out through the Director of Recreation. And that is also in the budget. And for Pathstones, we have $20,000 in the budget for Pathstones.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions, comments? Not seeing any. Madam Clerk?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we are still in committee input. I don't know if Councillor Olson wanted to bring a formal motion tonight, something along the lines of that committee recommend council direct staff to investigate a living wage policy for the town of Pelham staff, and that staff be directed to report back to council by May 2023. I don't know if that was what Councillor Olson was intending to do tonight, or if he will be bringing a notice of motion at a future council meeting.
Councillor Olson?
Mr. Mayor, I believe that captures it perfectly. If I could make that motion.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have that recorded. You could now debate that motion on the floor.
Okay, any debate on this motion that that the clerk has just read to us from Councillor Olson? Councillor Kerr?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I guess the question would be for Mr. Cribbs, is this timeline acceptable?
Mr. Cribbs?
Thank you for the question. Maybe Ms. Quinlan Murphy has something to, I see a smile on her face. I feel she has.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, it would be helpful on the finance side if it would be June after the year end. That's my only request. We do have financial statements that are presented in May. We also submit the financial information return by May 31st. So it is very tight for us from now until May. So if we can have a little breather and do it in June, it would be appreciated.
Council Olson?
I'm fine with that, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. So then you will reword that, Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I've indicated to report back within June of 2023.
Okay, thank you. Any other comment, Councillor Kerr?
No, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure our staff had enough time.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, comments on the motion? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk?
Thank you. Your vote begins with Councillor Olson,
Yes.
Councillor Wink,
Yes.
Councillor Niznik,
Yes.
Councillor Kerr,
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt,
yes,
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. To you, Mr. Mayor, I therefore then, unless there's any other debate, do have a motion put forth by Councillor Niznik that committee receive the 2023 operating budget presented by the treasurer and deputy treasurer for information, and that committee recommend to council to approve the 2023 operating budget at their meeting scheduled for February 6th, 2023. To you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Any comments, questions on this item? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This vote begins with Councillor Wink,
Yes.
Councillor Niznik,
Yes.
Councillor Kerr,
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt,
yes,
Councillor Olson,
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. Mr. Mayor, I do have a motion put forth by Councillor Olson that this special meeting of committee be adjourned. To you, Mr. Mayor, for any discussion.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the adjournment? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk?
Thank you. This vote begins with Councillor Hildebrandt,
yes.
Councillor Kerr,
Yes.
Councillor Niznik,
Yes.
Councillor Olson,
Yes.
Councillor Wink,
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does carry. Mr. Mayor, it is 6:58 and you can gavel out your meeting.
Good night, everyone. Job well
Good night.
done. Have a great evening. Bye.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Good night.